What's up, YouTube? This is Gresnick, and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we'll be reacting to We Were Wrong About the FNAF Timeline, So I Fixed It, by Bronze Films. I just randomly saw this, and I was like, I should check this out. And I've never seen anything from their channel, but it's a FNAF theory, so I want to see it. If there's any other videos similar to this that you think I should check out, you comment it down below, honestly. I would enjoy more FNAF theories. So, like and subscribe to Bronze Films and myself, and let's get into this.
November 16th, the first patch update was released for the latest FNAF project, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. As expected, it included bug fixes and things you would usually expect with this sort of update, but what none of us expected was for this update to include a lore, and I mean the type of lore that inspired me to create this entire video. A silhouette in the distance of Murray's costume manner that I think is the most infamous villain from the franchise. This update is what I think broke the FNAF timeline, and I'm going to
I never saw that. Maybe it's because not many people played after the bug fix, maybe. They kind of just played it whenever it came out, and then it kind of was over then.
try to
Okay.
fix it. So, my name is
William.
Bronze Films, and join me as I cover why William Afton knew about Remnant since 1979, how he learned to stuff bodies into suits from the Mimic, and why he might have even been in possession of the Mimic this entire time. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button as we go over how this update is the start to solving the earlier games and their timeline. Like I mentioned, at the very beginning of the game, you find this office where Dispatch talks to you, and across from you, you'll find this window with a silhouette moving and watching you. Now your first thought might be that it's just Digityper, but the issue here is that this silhouette is still here even after Jackie throws Digityper into this wall. And why would Steve add a dedicated silhouette that is always watching us just for it to be Digityper? Another popular theory suggests that it's Edwin, who is actually alive unlike the game suggests, here to fix his mistakes and to retrieve the Mimic. It could also just be anything related to Edwin, like his ghost that is possessing Mary's costume manner. Although it seems something like this is the case, for reasons I'll mention later in the video, I still don't think it's Edwin. I believe that this silhouette is none other than William Afton, here to retrieve what he believes is his and to discover mysteries along the way. Right off the bat, the reason William Afton was even represented as Purple Guy wasn't because he was literally purple, but because he acted as a shadowy evil figure. He was the shadow that we saw in the earlier FNAF games, like in the FNAF 2 Foxy minigame or in the Give Cake minigame when Purple Guy murders Charlie. That's why in Midnight Motorist, we see his color palette as yellow, the opposite of purple since he is no longer in the shadows throughout the minigame. It can even be argued that he has a shadow-like presence over MCM, as he slowly takes over Edwin's business, characters, and even his home, which I'll return to later. Every time we see William Afton, he's represented as the shadow, so why wouldn't this apply to Secret of the Mimic? But if we really are seeing this as William Afton, why? Well, I think the main reason is to retrieve the Mimic himself. At this point, you can find 7 different bodies inside MCM scattered around different areas or rooms. These are 7 different people from teams who have all failed to retrieve the Mimic schematics, with there even being text logged from their last moments before being killed by the Mimic. Outside of the manor, we can also find an abandoned work van that is run down and destroyed. We can assume it belonged to one of the other teams that were sent to MCM, and this van serves as a small clue to their disappearances. So if Fazbear's Entertainment sent this many people but they all failed, then I think we can assume at one point William would just go himself to finally retrieve the Mimic schematics. If William Afton was really an MCM, and trust me, I know that's a big if, what else did he see? Well, I think he probably saw the bodies stuffed inside of mascots. They were everywhere, and maybe he even saw the abandoned work van outside. And I'm sure when many of you saw these bodies, you would think back to the MCI. But wait, this was well before the missing children incident, as this game takes place in 1979, while the missing children incident is believed to happen at the earliest in 1983, 4 years after the events of this game. Well, we know the Mimic most likely learned this from David, as in the books, which I know probably aren't canon, but I think we can still use them as supporting evidence. David and the Mimic were dressed up in mascot suits from Edwin's workshop. He could have also learned this from the performers using the mascots, as in one of David's drawings, we see the elephant mascot suit attending his birthday party, which was probably just one of Edwin's employees. This could mean that William mimicked the Mimic years later with the missing children incident, and not the other way around like we all suspected for years. The most infamous event from the franchise was inspired by an endoskeleton, and maybe these bodies were also where William learned of Remnant. Remnant is described as a type of energy substance infused with the souls and memories of those who possess the animatronics. William could have been inspired by these bodies that at this point were possessing the mascots. As a fellow theorist, Logan Entertainment pointed out in a video on the blob, when you first encounter the Mimic in the elephant suit and near the crate where he escapes from, you find an incomplete head of an elephant suit. Taking a closer look at the head, there appears to be a small light source, and on rare occasions the light source within the head glows very bright and clearly looks possessed. We can even compare this mask to the bad ending of FNAF 3, where we see the
Yeah.
main animatronics alongside Golden Freddy having their mascots lit up by a bright light source, meaning they are still possessed. So what if this light source came from one of the dead technicians trying to possess the elephant head, trying to get Arnold's attention? Which to me could prove that their souls are still lingering around MCM, which William Afton would also take note of, and would begin to learn of Remnant. And like I said earlier, if he truly wanted to learn about Remnant and possession, then why not experiment on the same land that he discovered it on? I already made a video covering how William Afton took over Edwin's entire life, and this even includes his mansion and home. In the parachute ending, which is widely regarded as canon, we actually see the mansion being burnt down after escaping the Mimic. So what if, after this fire, William would save what was left of the mansion and remodeled it to the FNAF warehouse we all know and remember? During the good ending, where Arnold is able to reset the Mimic's programming to mimic David by playing him a bedtime story, we get a glimpse of David's room. And of course, this room is almost identical to the main room from FNAF 4 where all the nights take place. They share a similar blue carpet, cabinets, and even patterns on the wall. And the closets where the Mimic and Foxy would come out of are almost identical.
Only difference
and
is
most
that
importantly, they both
Edwin's
share the
doesn't
exact
have
same
two doors.
toys that we've only ever seen in the FNAF 4 house that are once again returning in David's room. This just can't be a coincidence, and I think it's to tell us that they are the same. So after the MCM fire, William would fix what's left of the mansion and would create it into a similar house with the same toys and style of room. But why? Why fix Edwin's mansion? Well, I believe it was for his experiments, a room dedicated to William's test subjects with the nightmare animatronics. We can assume that the FNAF 4 house and the house shown in the minigames for this game are not the same. Here, the house is in front of a playground and is in front of some road. There is also a sidewalk connecting it to Fredbear's Family Diner where the bite of 83 took place. So lining this house up with everything we know about the FNAF 4 house and even the house for Midnight Motorist, there are just simply no similarities. This house isn't on a hillside surrounded by a forest, and it is connected to a pizzeria, unlike the house from the Dreadbeard DLC and from Secret of the Mimic. So William would have his real house near Fredbear's Family Diner where the FNAF 4 minigames took place, and after Secret of the Mimic, he would have a secret house dedicated to his experiments that no one would know about. This could also be why none of the rooms from the minigames match up with the rooms from the actual nights, and we learn about William's experiments from the tales from the Pizzaplex novels. Like I said earlier, I know they've basically been proven to not be canon with new evidence from Secret of the Mimic, but we can still use them to help us prove claims like with Tatophobia. Here the story focuses on a boy named Rory who is facing real-like nightmares of the nightmare animatronics from FNAF 4. He's repeating the same night before realizing the house he's in isn't even real and is able to escape through a vent. There he finds gas tanks of hallucinatory gas that was making him see the nightmare animatronics, but reality they were just mannequins on rails that would activate each single night. But he then finds himself in an underground bunker which is none other than Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, as he finds rooms from Sister Location and even the Funtime animatronics. So based on the story, it appears that William Afton has been experimenting on children in this fake house built on top of the Sister Location bunker. The nightmares are just hallucinations that would come from the gas from the underground bunker. Meaning, if we follow the same logic with this house from Secret of the Mimic that would eventually become the FNAF 4 house, the underground tunnels connecting the house to MCM would eventually become the Sister Location bunker. Meaning, after the fire, not only did William remodel Edwin's mansion to the FNAF 4 house, but he would also remodel the underground area into the Sister Location bunker that would eventually become Circus Baby's entertainment and rental with the Funtime animatronics. We can even find tanks of some sort of gas in one of the cameras in the bunker. And of course, we can also find the cameras inside the FNAF 4 house where William would most likely watch his experiments take place. But back to a point earlier, if this was William the entire time in MCM with us, it could mean that he's the one who ends up finding the Mimic and taking it for himself. In the parachute ending, we see the Mimic take Arnold's data driver before walking towards the forest. Now he could be going back to MCM, which he most likely sees as his home, or he's just wandering into the forest, so what happens to him is completely unknown. Maybe William would have found him walking along the road or found him going back to MCM, since William would also probably want to get away from the fire. He could then find a way to disable the Mimic and to then take the endoskeleton itself rather than the schematics. Or if you want to argue that the Moon.exe ending is canon, after Arnold resets its programming, we have no idea what happened to the fixed Mimic. But if William was stalking us around MCM, he probably followed us to Edwin's mansion as well, where he would walk into the Mimic sleeping and Arnold just sitting there. If we were to predict what happened, he probably fired or even murdered Arnold while he took the Mimic for himself. Because his programming was already fixed and no longer a threat, this would be extremely easy unlike the parachute ending where we have no idea how William would apprehend him. So saying that William was in possession of the Mimic since what was before the first game in the FNAF timeline, what could this mean for the lore? Well, for one, it could explain the almost futuristic technology we see with the Funtime animatronics. When looking at Funtime Freddy's blueprints, he has the ability to voice Mimic and to lure, the same way the Mimic does. Did William Afton copy the Mimic's technology onto the Funtimes? He could keep learning from it, which was even the reason Fazbear's Entertainment were so desperate to get their hands on its schematics. If you really want to get crazy with possibilities or theories, the Mimic could be mimicking and replacing any human character we know of. In the sister location bunker, we saw
Interior.
human-like robot heads that were immediately connected to the crying child or Gregory being a robot. So using the same logic here, William could program the mimic to mimic the crying child, Elizabeth, or even Michael Afton. Then he would just slap some flesh on them, and before you know it, they've been the mimic this entire time. Taking it a step further, we can say the mimic was Shadow Freddy in the FNAF 3 minigames, simply because in FNAF 3, Shadow Freddy also mimics William Afton. In the minigames between each night, we see Shadow Freddy lure the 4 different animatronics into a room where William Afton dismantles them, the same way William Afton lured 5 children into a room and murdered them. William Afton is using Shadow Freddy to mimic his same actions, so what if Shadow Freddy was actually the mimic or at least somehow connected to him? You may argue that Shadow Freddy is a hallucination and isn't real, as he's most like an agony or remnant manifestation. Well, what if Shadow Freddy is also a physical animatronic and not made of pure remnant? If he were a physical animatronic, that's why he looks like he's actually there, and that's why in FNAF 3 he seems real when the other animatronics follow him. They're not seeing some remnant illusion, but they're seeing a real animatronic leading them somewhere. And if he is real, how did William control an empty suit? Well, what if he didn't? What if it was the mimic under the Shadow Freddy suit? If William were to lure the animatronics on his own, we can assume it wouldn't work, since the animatronics only respond to other suits. But since he shoved the mimic into the Shadow Freddy suit, they would follow him and they would respond to him, as he would no longer just be an endoskeleton. And all of this would only be possible because he took control of the endoskeleton years earlier. However, I want to make it as clear as possible that this is just a thought to mess around with. So how does any of this fix the timeline? Well, I believe it tells us that William knew of Remnant since 1979 and that his experiments in the FNAF 4 house and the sister location bunker started around the same time, probably around 1983 and still before the missing children incident. And finding these bodies inside mascot suits can also maybe tell us about his motivations. The MCI wasn't some crazy and evil event because one of his children died, but it was a cold and calculated event to learn more about Remnant. I know this is also theorized to be the motives behind the FNAF 3 minigames. William is returning to this pizzeria to dismantle these animatronics, extract the Remnant, and use it for his funtime animatronics. If this were to be the case, how did William know Remnant were in these animatronics and that it could be transferred to other animatronics? Well, now we can say he learned it from events in Secret of the Mimic. I also think having a clear idea of his motives can help us when deciding dates in the timeline. Because Remnant was something he knew of so early on, this could put events in the franchise earlier in the timeline, like with the MCI happening in 1983, and other deaths happening later in the timeline, like Charlie Emily dying in 1987. But these are just ideas because I know how controversial these topics can be. This could also tell us that the scooper from sister location was made around this time as well, and maybe even before the MCI. Based on the scooper blueprints, which actually stand for Scalable Creation of Ulterior Presence, we know it was designed as a remnant injector and as a remnant reservoir, which is most likely how William injected the remnant into the fun times if this is the case, and how Michael survived after being scooped. Instead of this being something that was created much later on in the timeline, it's always been there and could have maybe been used anywhere else we're not aware of. Of course, we can even tie this back to FNAF's infamous theory revolving around Circus Baby. With this theory, he brings up how the Immortal and the Relentless is a parallel to Edwin's story from the books, who had a mansion that was burned in a fire. But now we can directly tie this to the events of Secret of the Mimic, where Edwin does exist as a character and his mansion is burned in a fire, just like in the TV show. Then in sister location, we saw this chip being taken out of Circus Baby that Michael places on hand unit so Circus Baby can communicate with him. Now it's this small chip that is theorized to be the Mimic chip or a copy of his code. We then saw a similar chip being inserted into Helpy in FNAF Help Wanted 2, which would create a branch of the Mimic code making Helpy the Mimic as well. A well-known theory already. In the same level, we find a drawing of Helpy escaping a burning building, a parallel to the chip escaping the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator fire. The chip just also happens to glow green like Glitchtrap. Circus Baby is described as being able to quote-unquote pretend, which could be referring to what the Mimic can do, and Baby is able to change voices when she takes on the form of Ennard. So taking in all this information with the context of what I just discussed, it would honestly make perfect sense. William was already in possession of the Mimic for years by this point, so he was the one who added the Mimic chip to Circus Baby, even giving her the ability to mimic voices. I also want to bring up that Dispatch from Secret of the Mimic and Hand Unit from Sister Location share the exact same voice. We know Dispatch turns out to be M1 or F10N4, so because it's the same voice as Hand Unit, this could be telling us that these Mimic chips can store different voices, as Hand Unit even gives us options to what voice we want to hear.
Using the keypad below, please select a new companion voice. For male, press 1. For female, press 2.
There's no
For text
number.
only, press 3. For other options, press 4. It seems that you had some trouble with the keypad. I see what you were trying to type, and I will autocorrect it for you. Thank you for choosing Angsty Teen.
So, funny story. A dead body was found in this vent once. Okay, so not that funny, but it's a story.
It's even being theorized that these other voices like the angsty teen were a part of Team 12 that were first sent to retrieve the mimic that I mentioned earlier, as the mimic chip would copy these voices and store them to use later. So hand unit could directly be M1 or it's a branch of the mimic code, but either way it feels that these similarities are intentional, and it also seems that FNAF was right all along. But again, all of this would only really be possible if the silhouette from Secret of the Mimic is indeed William. But there is also a big gap in the timeline where we have no idea what happened to the Mimic. We all know after William was spring-locked, he was trapped in this room for decades, so where was the Mimic for more than 30 years till we saw him again in Ruin? Well, I see two different options. One, the Mimic was being held in the bunker and escaped with the rest of the fun times when the time came, or you could take it as far to say that he was one of the fun times. But the option I believe in the most, which is something I kinda already discussed, is that the Mimic would return to his home or to Murray's costume manor. Whether that be that the Mimic just wandered off after William disappeared, or that he was always trying to return, the Mimic returning to MCM could set up his role in Ruin. It's well believed now that the Pizzaplex was built over MCM, so if the Mimic did return, he would be stationary for years until someone would find him around the time the Pizzaplex was being built. Then he roams
Yeah,
around
makes
the
sense.
Pizzaplex, murders people here and there before being trapped back in MCM by presumably Gregory and Vanessa. Now earlier I said I don't think it's Edwin, and that's still something I firmly believe in, because I don't think he would be stalking us. By this point Edwin already knows just how dangerous the Mimic really is after he was attacked by him, severely injuring his legs in the process.
I can't move. I can't feel my legs. You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out. I'm sorry, Enzu. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. Enzu, respond.
So why wouldn't Edwin want to step in to try and save Arnold from the Mimic, or to try and even stop the Mimic himself? I honestly don't see the reason for Edwin to be back in MCM stalking us unless he would want to step in or stop the Mimic. Now I
Also,
do
I
still
don't really
definitely
know
think
how
he's
he could
alive, especially
escape.
since in the Tales novels he has a pretty significant role with the Pizzaplex. So I do think he's out there somewhere, and there's even a chance we'll see him in a future project. But with all that said,
Yeah,
remember this
maybe.
video is just a theory and nothing is confirmed. This silhouette could be anyone, and it being Willie Mathon is just one interpretation of many. So what do you guys think? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories, as I love reading through the comments. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe.
I do rather like that theory. Would be interesting too, and it does explain a lot of things. This was a great video. Go like and subscribe to Bronze Films, I definitely will, and myself, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.